everyone, and welcome to our talk on the importance of creating an alcohol-safe workplace for an inclusive and well culture. We are Jocelyn, Pepe, and Amy C. Willis, and we are so excited to be here with you today. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day for this very important topic. So we're going to introduce ourselves and then we're going to get right into it. So I am the holistic sober coach, and I am also an alcohol culture educator, speaker, and consultant. I've been working professionally in the addiction recovery space since 2019 and have been sober myself since 2016 after struggling with a pretty severe alcohol addiction for many years. And only since getting sober and stepping outside of normative alcohol culture have I really learned the truth about alcohol in terms of its inherent risks, harms, and impacts. And in the last 5 years of working in this space, what's become clear is how little awareness there is around alcohol's negative impacts on us as individuals, communities, organizations, and more. And at the end of the day, we are all impacted by alcohol. I am deeply passionate about telling the truth about alcohol, not in an effort to coax everyone into sobriety, but instead to equip people with information so that they can make informed, empowered decisions about their bodies, lives, and wellness. And given how ubiquitous alcohol is in many parts of the world and how inherently harmful it is, it only makes sense that we have just as much access to accurate information as we do to the alcohol itself. Alcohol is a women's issue, it's a health equity issue, and it's an issue of consent. And through powerful conversations like these, I'm confident that we can and will shift normative alcohol culture and ultimately reduce alcohol-related harms. Jocelyn.
Thanks, Amy. It's nice to be here with you today. And hello, everybody. I'm Jocelyn Pepe. I am a fractional head of mental health and organizational well-being and a mental health researcher and coach supporting organizations through our business True to have a whole holistic, whole human approach to well-being, from hiring and onboarding to internal policies and support that facilitates a holistic and well culture change. I have firsthand experience witnessing and being directly impacted by alcohol addiction, and have witnessed and felt its effects throughout most of my life, watching people close to me suffer, including people dying from alcohol overuse. When I first started, had my first baby, I really limited my alcohol use because it didn't feel good and well in my body. And after that, I had a brain injury 3 years ago. And since then, I have been sober to decrease and limit, the neurotoxins in my brain. And so that's been a bit of my journey and why this topic is really important to me.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to get into a little bit about alcohol. So as I mentioned, I'm really passionate about telling the truth and providing accurate, accessible information. And so that is going to be our starting point today. So alcohol is a legal, addictive, neurotoxic, psychoactive substance that is responsible for more than 3 million deaths annually and globally, which accounts for 5.1% of the global burden of disease and is the leading cause of death for people ages 15 to 49. In 1988, alcohol was classified as a Group 1 carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. And we now know it is causally linked to at least 7 different types of cancer, including breast, mouth, esophagus, liver, and colon. Alcohol consumption is a causal factor in more than 200 diseases, injuries, and other health conditions, and also negatively impacts things like mood, mental health, sleep, digestion, and much more. For women, even small amounts of alcohol contribute to significant increases in our risk for breast cancer and heart disease and the worsening of menopause symptoms. Both the World Health Organization and the World Heart Federation have clearly stated that no level of alcohol use for humans is safe, and the safest amount to consume is none at all. And despite all of these notable health concerns in the West, alcohol consumption has become exceedingly normalized. And through this normalization process, we have stopped questioning it. And this is largely due to the substantial influence of the global alcohol industry, or big alcohol, who significantly shapes the messaging and the narratives when it comes to what we think and what we know about alcohol, largely through expensive ad campaigns and lobbying efforts to influence global alcohol policy. The global alcohol industry is valued at $1.3 trillion as of 2021, with expected growth to reach over $2 trillion by 2031. And in 2023, it was estimated that the alcohol industry spent more than $7 billion on advertising and marketing, which again is a lot of money invested to largely shape public perspective and really influence the narrative when it comes to alcohol. And, that amount of money wouldn't be spent unless those advertising efforts were effective. As such, we have the juxtaposition of global, alcohol brands telling us about alcohol and the facts about the impact on our health. And with that, it creates an environment with a lot of conflicting and confusing information, which makes having a clear understanding of what alcohol is and isn't more challenging. There are numerous risks and harms involved with alcohol consumption, not just to the person consuming alcohol, but also to and for friends and family members and community members and beyond. And as we will discuss, the burden on our healthcare, legal, and financial sectors is also considerable. Alcohol is a depressant and negatively impacts sleep, energy levels, stress levels, mood, mental health. We have data to demonstrate how alcohol worsens depression and anxiety symptoms, yet alcohol is also used by many to manage these same symptoms. For women, as I mentioned, it's especially important to know and understand the relationship between alcohol and breast cancer and alcohol and heart disease. And if anybody has any questions about that, or if you would like resources on that, please feel free to reach out, because I have many on hand and I'm really passionate about this topic and I would love to point you in the right direction. Alcohol affects every major system and organ in our bodies in negative and varying ways. And what we're seeing is even smaller amounts of alcohol can have negative consequences. So what this tells us is every drink matters and every drink counts. And generally speaking, drinking less is better for us and will serve to reduce alcohol-related harms and risks. And as I mentioned, alcohol is costly to us all. It impacts us all across healthcare, business, and legal sectors. Alcohol costs all of us billions of dollars every single year. Globally, substance use disorders impact 10 to 20% of the population, with alcohol use disorder being the most common substance use disorder. And while technically not a clinical disorder, heavy regular drinking or binge drinking, which varies depending on where you live, are exceedingly common in developed countries, affecting 1 in 4 adults. Beyond the health consequences, which are substantial, alcohol causes significant social and economic losses to the individual, society, and the workplace, which is what we're going to be talking more in depth about today. Alcohol consumption causes death and disability relatively early in life, which subsequently cuts one's capacity short to contribute in meaningful ways in the world. In people aged 20 to 39 years old, approximately 13.5% of total deaths are attributable to alcohol. Lost productivity is defined as the lost value of work due to premature death, long-term and short-term disability, which also includes absenteeism and presenteeism. And as you can see on the slide here, substance use lost productivity, with a few different countries here as examples, is significant. In 2019, in the US alone, that cost was $179 billion. So that's not a small number, which is why we are having these conversations. So organizations are uniquely positioned to create massive change and a ripple effect when it comes to reducing alcohol-related harms. But because alcohol has become so normalized, we don't question its impact or how it might be creating harm within the workplace. So whether it's after work drinks, drinks with clients, gifting alcohol to employees, or using alcohol to punctuate and celebrate workplace wins, these practices have become ingrained and commonplace that we no longer look critically at them or explore what an alternative could look like. And that's what we would like to encourage everyone to do today, exploring what healthier, well-being focused alternatives could look like in the workplace. So, Jocelyn, what is the role of the workplace in this context?
Yeah, thanks for all of that incredible information, Amy. There's so much knowledge in what you've just shared and insight that I feel like is not mainstream information. And there are some real normalizations, and there's also a lot of stigma around this conversation. So I just want to invite everybody listening to really approach this with a deep level of curiosity. It's about education, information. It's about raising awareness, finding various perspectives that might serve you, your organization, and then having new actions to take from this day. So as we approach the rest of our conversation, we invite you to be curious with yourself, with your workplace, whatever perspective you're coming in with. And the stigma, I think, around this topic, and specifically around mental health and addictions, is important to address up top. And what I really want to encourage people to consider is that addiction comes from a place of an illness, and people are often feeling shame or guilt or unaware of their relationship to alcohol. And so we're not speaking specifically about addiction today, but the use of alcohol in general. And I think now that when we go into the conversation around the workplace, what I wanted to just start off with is that substance use and mental health go hand in hand. So worldwide, mental health disorders affect 300 million people, and the majority of those people, 70% of them, are employed. So that is the importance of this conversation, because culturally, individual perceptions and beliefs and the role of environmental factors, which in this context is the workplace, really sets the context for what we're talking about today, where workplace culture impacts the drinking behaviors of individuals and social groups within the workplace, and as well impacts the behaviors of individuals and social groups beyond the workplace, including families and the community. And as Amy mentioned, there are, alcohol is a depressant drug that slows parts of your brain. And so when I bring it into a workplace context, this impairs cognitive performance, not only under the influence of alcohol, however, post influence of alcohol, whether it's the next day or a compounding effect. And a key component of how many people in workplaces are compensated is for their contribution, whether that's cognitive, physical. People need their wits about them. And problem drinking is 4 times as common as severe alcohol dependence. So we're talking about the whole range of how people are impacted by alcohol in the workplace. And the cognitive part is the neuroinflammation, because the use of alcohol impacts brain processing, including memory, executive functioning, in various parts of their brain. And those impairments in individuals persist even when somebody is technically classified as sober. So there's 3 areas that I kind of wanted to highlight that really are important to consider when we're talking about alcohol use in the workplace and creating a safe culture that's inclusive. First of all is work conditions and environment. And so through our research, workplace environments and conditions can both contribute to and ameliorate the use of alcohol. And as a mental health coach in organizations, I hear the levels of stress and anxiety and depression that individuals are under, and that is really influenced by their use of alcohol to mitigate those feelings, as you had mentioned earlier, Amy. So the conditions and environment are a really important thing to consider, and that's why, as a head of well-being, we talk a lot about the workplace culture and how it's contributing to a healthy and well culture. So whether that, in the day day-to-day working conditions, because, you know, the people who have the least autonomy and the least control are often the ones suffering the most in mental health, and can be turning to alcohol to suppress feelings or stress. And so those high psychological demands and low decision latitude contribute to the high job strain. And then the working conditions and environment, Amy, I know you and I have talked about this before, and it's a conversation that I think is really important, is that certain careers are high stress, and the top profession with alcohol abuse is the legal profession. And so 1 in 5 attorneys abuse alcohol, which is double the national rate. And as you mentioned before, we have research and statistics to back these up that are really important, just to highlight, you know, the places where use is really a problem. And then the other area that I wanted to chat about was the gender and demographic area around alcohol in the workplace and mental well-being, because as individuals are entering the workforce and entering the workplace, they're at early stages of their career, and that's the age where behavioral health problems can start to manifest and are vulnerable in early 20s. As well, demographically, we are seeing a huge trend of younger adults saying no to alcohol. So comparative to 2 decades ago, 72% of those under the age of 35 were drinking, and now it's 62%. But the challenge that we are seeing is an increase in alcohol consumption in the 35 to 54-year-olds, and then another increase in consumption age 55 plus. So whilst we're seeing a decrease on one side, we're seeing an increase on the other. And this is a huge topic of conversation right now in the workplace, of the multi-generational influence that we have, and of multiple generations in the workforce at one time. So it's not a one-size-fits-all conversation. And I think that's what this points to. And that's what is important around culture and well-being from a workplace perspective. It's how do we find things that people need and give it to the people who need those resources most. And then finally, before we shift over a little bit, is a lot of the DEI and DEIB networking and conversations. Close to half the world's population doesn't drink. And so when we think about a more global workplace and more movement, more migration, there's a lot of things to really consider in terms of how alcohol is being used, and where is this conversation happening from a diversity and inclusion perspective, so everyone feels a sense of belonging. And beyond that, in the workplace, people are struggling every day with addiction, in recovery, and in high stress. So it's really important to be mindful of what individuals might be going through, and how organizational approaches to well-being and alcohol are being taken care of or promoted. So that's really the bottom line, a big bottom line of how the workplace is involved in this conversation, the importance of an alcohol safe culture. And so I'm curious, Amy, from your perspective, like, what can workplaces do, and how do they see things differently, like just from what you see?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that a multi-pronged, multifaceted, like very holistic approach would probably be the most beneficial. So obviously the education and awareness piece is really, really crucial, because again, as I had mentioned, there's a lot of misinformation out there, coupled with the normalization process. People just aren't thinking about it in the same ways, or in ways that really highlight well-being. So I think, working with folks like us who can come in and not only provide the education and the awareness pieces, but also provide the coaching and support for people who might be engaging with alcohol in ways that aren't prioritizing their well-being. So, working with a coach or a consultant is a really great, like, I think, first step to support that. And Also, having consultants like us look at policy. So what is actually, in the policy around alcohol, and what is the practice in relation to those things? So I would say a multifaceted approach would be most beneficial for anyone interested in creating a different experience in a more alcohol safe environment.
I appreciate that. And I think further into our conversation, we'll share some more pointed steps into what this might look like for our listeners who want to take something away to consider. And I know that on the screen now, we have some curious questions where questions on the screen are really an individual reflection for you to start to consider how your workplace is or is not supporting an alcohol safe culture. So Amy, what are some of these like really individual questions that people can start asking themselves to get more curious about their use or their organization's policies and perspectives?
Yeah. And I also just want to echo what you had previously said about really going into this reflection from a place of curiosity, because it isn't about judging. It isn't about making yourself wrong. It's about exploring what is and seeing if it's working for you. And if it's not, what can be done about that? And I also want to echo, this conversation obviously is not about addiction, but this conversation is for everybody who engages in alcohol in any ways. This conversation is for you. Yes. In terms of questions to be asking, I mean, obviously, does your organization focus around, alcohol-centric environments for gatherings? We spoke about the environmental piece. Is it a high-stress environment with long working hours? How does your organization support folks in holistic care? So paid time off, therapy, mental wellness days, are those practices put in place to relieve some of the stress that employees might be feeling? Looking at claims around, alcohol related mental health claims that are coming in, looking at, in some cases, claims around breast cancer, because we know the relationship between alcohol and breast cancer is significant. Having, alcohol in your workspace, like, is it there? Is it being consumed? Is there a spoken or unspoken expectation to involve alcohol in meetings with clients? So there really are a multitude of angles that you can look at when you are trying to assess how alcohol safe your workplace actually is.
Thank you. It's so interesting. Just some really important questions that I might not have considered until we embarked on this work. And so I invite everybody to consider it from that place. From Amy's perspective, as an individual, or like what you can think about as your own self, there's also some higher level cultural type questions that we can start to consider from a workplace. So whether you're an HR leader, a well-being leader, or just a team leader in charge of conferences or events, there are so many ways to look at this. And Amy talked about policy earlier, getting feedback. What do employees want or not want? And I think there's a lot around networking and conferences now that we're all back to in-person events. And so many of these events involve social, which normally associated with having a drink. So are you offering different ways for employees to network? What about working mothers? Like, are they having an opportunity to network in new ways that are healthy and well and support mental well-being? So when we look at an organizational well-being strategy, it's not just about delivering content for people who are suffering. It's about creating an environment where individuals are given the opportunity to thrive. So maybe that's a hiking session or some kind of like networking event that is not revolving around just having a cocktail and having a conversation. So thinking about it from those bigger picture perspectives are really important, and considering the inclusion piece. If 50% of the global population does not drink or engage in alcohol use, what does your inclusion strategy have in it around this piece? So I think those are some of the bigger picture questions that are really important to consider here. Is there anything else that you'd add, Amy, in terms of just like that self-reflection piece before we move into some more kind of concrete, actionable considerations considerations for those in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when we're thinking about how to be inclusive and really addressing the fact that a lot of folks don't drink for a variety of reasons, just not making any assumptions about that, not assuming in one direction or another why someone may choose to drink or not, and just really focusing on how an environment or an event can be made truly inclusive from all perspectives and where everybody can thrive in a way that has nothing to do with alcohol really seems so important. And just ensuring that, networking and advancement opportunities are made available to everybody in a way that, again, doesn't hinge on whether or not you participate in going to a winery for an event, a work-related event.
Yeah, thank you. And so I'm always coming at this from a mental health perspective. Mm-hmm. So when organizations are looking at their mental health strategy, there's 4 key components that are critical. And that is having a vision that recognizes what a psychologically healthy workplace is. And so that psychologically healthy workplace includes this conversation that we're talking about. Psychological safety is one thing. And then it's like including all of this stuff that we are talking about around alcohol specifically, and having those comprehensive strategies and company policies in place. So as you mentioned earlier, around different types of resources and leveraging consultants or contractors or coaches who come in and support those strategy and policy, as you and I both do. So many organizations have such great reactive support in place, and everything that I feel like you and I are bringing to the table is really about proactivity. How do you create a bigger picture, healthy, well culture, and not just the reactive support? And so the reactive support is really critical and really important from an EAP perspective, from different types of talks and sessions and resources. So there's proactive and reactive services that can be offered. And the biggest factor in adoption in all of this is that senior leadership recognizes and gets personally involved and supports the initiatives that are being implemented culturally throughout an organization that really impacts success, sustainability, and culture change.
Absolutely.
So, those are the higher level pieces. When we dive, I think, a bit further into workplace alcohol harm reduction, there's a cultural approach, and that cultural approach is the individual, the societal, the environmental impact influence. And so we found some great studies out of Australia, actually, on how to really execute this. And so we just summarized a few things here around where to start. So if you're looking to bring this inside your organization, alcohol intervention, start with this gap analysis policy package, which we've talked a lot about, those employee awareness programs, which I know you deliver, training of leaders. This is something that I specifically work a lot in, is training leaders in some core competencies that really support curiosity over judgment and help mitigate the stigma around anything mental health related and alcohol specifically. And then having those referral pathways, which so many organizations have invested so much energy and time into the support systems they have for their communities and their networks and their organizations. So I feel like, a lot of that is there. And then it comes down to accessibility and helping work through the stigma and the shame that individuals suppress or feel and don't necessarily seek out help. And all of this is really important in like the uptake, the acceptability, the sustainability of this type of work. And we're doing there's so many organizations as well out there, and you're such a champion of this, Amy, is really creating awareness to the normalization of alcohol in society and in culture. And that was the intention of this conversation, was really to bring some greater awareness with some new perspectives and tangible actions for individuals to take away. And we've approached this from like a real cultural perspective. So a cultural model is really important to consider, because there's so many things that can contribute to an individual's use of alcohol, to the workplace customs and traditions, and what that social networking is and how it's perceived, and how individuals partake in it. Those work conditions, like we talked about earlier in our conversation, really the psychological stress that individuals feel. So those hours, the conditions, this is all about the heads of well-being or HR leaders who are working on the working conditions and how it relates to well-being and health policies and those external factors. I mean, we are at the very beginning of creating awareness around this, because I think, Amy, what I would like to bounce back to you for the conversation is the societal norms and the marketing engine behind the normalization of alcohol use.
Yeah, I can't stress it enough. Like, I actually just finished reading Dr. Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal. And he goes into great detail around, when things, practices, products, whatever, become normalized, they virtually fade into the background of our existence. So, and that is very much true of alcohol. It is ingrained in so many cultures and societies. And, it is to the point where it's something that is so baked in to celebrating, to stress management, to grief, to, amplifying positive feelings. It's everywhere. It's becoming more and more readily available. And marketing messaging is very intentional. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of money goes into, billions of dollars a year go into ensuring that the messaging and the narrative is such that we don't have the accurate information, and it's positioned in such a way that it's harmless, it's fun, it's easy. And we factually know that none of that is true. And I think that normalization process very much extends into the workplace, right? Which is why organizations are so well positioned to create the change that we're talking about. But yeah, I think very much it is not to be underestimated how influential it is and how powerful it is in terms of how we understand and engage with alcohol in our lives.
Yeah, there's so many factors at play. I think there's a really important piece when you talked about Gabor Mate. Like, there are so many factors at play that influence an individual's perception, perspective, societies, family, community perspective, perception on this conversation. And that leads to consider there are going to be barriers to the success of this. So attitudes around alcohol in the workplace can certainly be a barrier. The proper policy development and awareness creation really needs to be considered. Barriers to success in like the access to support. I do know that it's getting easier to access support through organizational EAP programs, or, there's ESP programs that are starting to evolve, like employee sustainability, that are very proactive. And so just accessibility is important, and ease of access. So when someone's struggling, it's not hard to find the resource, it's easy. And that's why I think training and development of leaders is critical, so that they can steer people in the right directions to what is available in those types of situations. And it's all about communication and creating a sustainable well culture. So the greatest success comes when this topic and this conversation and this area of well-being really gets embedded in a tailored alcohol intervention workplace well-being framework, and it gets promoted in that way, and it's considered functionally across the organization to how can we support this topic, how can we change our behaviors, our patterns, our normalizations of what we always traditionally do, having a conference with cocktail hour, what can be different, something can change and elevate the way that well-being is approached in the workplace around this topic. And so, Amy, what do you feel workplaces can do to support or create change from your perspective? How, where do they start? How do they go about it?
Yeah. So, I think even just some of the questions that we, which from folks that I've talked to so far, some of the questions that we pose in this conversation and more broadly are catching people off guard. And I think that really speaks to just how normalized things have become within their organization. So, really checking in and going at it again from a place of curiosity and also from a place of radical honesty, like what's actually happening here. So digging into what these practices look like, what these policies look like. And I think, the commitment to creating truly holistic and well and inclusive environment is going to be the driving force behind it, because ultimately you can't create a truly holistic well-being and inclusive environment when alcohol isn't being addressed. And so, so I would say, the starting point is actually assessing what is. And then, from there, if you're then not sure where to go, that would be where Jocelyn and I would come in to provide that support. So I think, working with leadership, because how leadership views alcohol, the level of alcohol safety within an organization and the practices and what's expected, is going to shape how the rest of the environment takes shape. So working with leaders, providing that awareness, that training, and then actually looking at policies and practices that are mindful of how alcohol exists in the spaces. And that's not even to say that alcohol needs to be removed altogether, right? Like that's something that organizations might want to look at, but I think it's really more about ensuring that everyone feels welcome and everyone feels like they have a place there, regardless of whether or not they participate in alcohol and consumption and culture. Yeah. So I think a few things. There's lots of things, but as a starting point, I think those questions can be really helpful.
Yes. So Amy and I have created a document with those questions on it. If you are interested, please reach out to either one of us. We can send it to you. We're happy to have a quick conversation. There are so many factors that lead people turning to alcohol, and we kind of discussed it throughout today, but I wanted to leave us on this thought because it really is about compassion and curiosity as we go about this type of work and this type of conversation, because people can turn to alcohol for so many different reasons, and it's just a habitual, normalized way that if we heighten some awareness to the actual impacts and effects and start to look at it more with a more curious lens, I think we can see a change and we can approach it in an interesting new perspective. So there's lots of ways to approach this. Yeah, and I think that's really where I wanted to end it. And I know that we have some listeners here with some questions. So we'll open it up now for the last few minutes of this conversation. And TJ, I think you have your hand up there. Jump in.
Yes, thank you. First, I just want to say thank you. This is an awesome topic to be talking about, especially right now. My history, I was active duty military, and alcohol was very prevalent at every Friday afternoon commander's call. And not only did we have issues with, I was a JAG, so I was a lawyer, so issues with DUI and people having to go into rehab eventually, but women putting themselves in a very vulnerable position when they were very much the minority. So I think this discussion is absolutely fantastic. So I just wanted to say thank you and throw that out there, that there's a whole bunch of other perspectives too about what's happening when people are drinking alcohol and inhibitions get lowered, especially for females, given the demographics on this call.
Thank you so much for bringing that other perspective. And I think that's the important part. There are so many other perspectives. We've covered a few from our lenses and our angles. And I think something that really sparked for me, TJ, is the inhibition piece when I was talking about cognitive awareness when alcohol is in use. And so you've brought that into a whole nother topic of conversation, because it also then leads into women being in precarious situations, also leads to a high level of emotional reactivity. And some of the work that I'm about to embark on with first line responders this fall is around that emotional reactivity that happens because there is less less awareness and less consideration for behavior that leads to emotional outbursts. And this topic, it's specifically relating to violence. And so emotional outbursts and violence. And so there are so many other ways that we can look at it from different, like from a military perspective, or from a first line responder perspective, from a organizational perspective. So there's all the different places where people work that we can talk about. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add into that. Thank you for that angle, TJ. And we also know, like, we have all kinds of data that shows us alcohol's involvement in workplace sexual harassment and sexual assault and violence. So truly, going back to the beginning when we talked about how alcohol impacts us all, it really, really does in obviously, a variety of ways. So thank you for adding that in. And that's really a key piece in the workplace context as well.
Any other questions from our audience, comments, insights that you want to share before we wrap up this chat today? Thank you so much. Amy and I feel like we are literally at the very tippy top of the iceberg. And so TJ, I think you pointed us there is so much in this conversation, and in this initial awareness raising session, we approached it, from our perspectives, and there is so much more.
As a prosecutor, I'd say 90% of my cases had alcohol involved on one side or the other, or both. And when it's being done at the workplace where there is that peer pressure or expectation to participate, and then to have that be the result, it's so important. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Really appreciate you sharing your perspective too, because it sheds light on the reality from your perspective. Working with this conversation directly it's huge. And I think the more we can talk about it and create psychologically safe spaces to have these discussions is really, really important. And that's the key, is creating psychologically safe spaces for these types of conversations, because it can be very triggering and bring up a lot for people. And so we'll continue to chip away at the iceberg and, have more and more conversations. And so we thank everybody for being here today. As Amy and I both started off with, we both have very intimate connection to alcohol and addiction and its impacts on individuals' suffering and the projected reality on those around them. And so it is really a part of our purpose to help create healthy and well cultures where all individuals can thrive.
Absolutely. Thank you. I just want to echo thank you to everybody as well. And if anybody has any additional questions who's maybe catching the replay, please reach out to us. Or if you know that your organization could benefit from some support when it comes to creating a more alcohol safe environment, we would love to chat as well. But thank you. Thank you to everybody and for being here and giving us some of your time today. We appreciate it very much.